this man a little rest with a round of applause, and we'll take questions. I'm going to ask you to identify yourself if you're able and if you want to. If you're not, I'm not going to stop you talking, but it would be just nice. Yes, please.
Just Dermot Nolan is my name. And incidentally, I think I still have somewhere Baron and Sweezy's book from about 45 years ago. Just one question. You said that the financial institutions or the financial sector has quite a high proportion of the debt itself. Now, does that mean that they owe it to each other, or where do their loans come from?
Yeah, that's a good question. They essentially borrow from each other. Banks borrow from each other routinely, and large financial corporations borrow money on the market. They basically are borrowing mainly from other banks or other financial institutions. Doesn't have to be a bank. But that's the easiest example. But it is amazing. They are the creators of so much debt, but they actually owe so much debt themselves.
But I presume that means there can't be a solution. Because
there's no simple one.
If anybody defaults, they'd all go.
There's no simple one. Yeah. There really is not. Yeah.
The gentleman.
Well, let him go first. He was before me.
I saw you next one, so.
I wanted to use, all right, I wanted to verbatim. Okay, can we adopt a stand up to speak procedure, because it's easier to see in here and see what they, no, Lloyd Johnson is my name. I've been very interested in it. My father, who's an economist in Trinity College, he attempted to develop a theory of credit in the late 60s, early 70s, and he couldn't get it published. And I have his notes, and he was unable to write a paper because the existence of the credit system was taken for granted and not open to question. It was a figment of imagination, imaginary money. And we have been living on imaginary money. Now, I had hopes that you might have brought in the environmental limitation of the finiteness of the planet as being a factor that would make people look at the theory of credit and how much we can we get away from the business of growth, to have full employment and to stabilise the growth. That's the key thing. If that could be done and get the politics of that right.
Thank you.
I did mention the environment, and I would have liked, I could be happy to talk more about it, and if you want to read more about it, you're more than welcome. And if you want to read about growth, that is the chapter that's online, and I can send Finbar maybe I have, I don't know if I did, the URL so that you can just read that if you'd like to. But essentially, if capitalism doesn't grow, it's in crisis. That's essentially the problem. And we spend a chapter developing it and talking about it. And so that people talk about zero growth capitalism, there can be no such thing. Okay? That is, it can't be stable. You can have it, doesn't grow for a while. That's a very unstable situation, a very difficult one in which a lot of people are really suffering. So that is one of the issues with capitalism. There's no question to me that, that the issue of the environment today is an issue of capitalism. Not that there weren't, and we talk about them, environmental problems before. We quote Plato, who talks about environmental problems in Greece, okay? And more than 2,000 years ago. So we know that in ancient civilizations, there was human-induced environmental degradation, okay? But with capitalism, you have a whole other, you have a system which has no boundaries whatsoever. It accepts no boundaries to its own growth of capital. It accepts no boundaries with regard to the environment, and it has to grow And and we have developed the technology to do damage a lot more quickly than it could be done in the past. So the current, I mean, this is our argument in the book, John and myself, is that this is primarily a crisis of capitalism that is caused by capitalism, and that capitalism really doesn't have an answer for, we talk about green capitalism, which is one of the movements in the United States, and we talk about that is a false answer. So that's very much a part of our thinking, and I maybe should have spent some more time on it in the discussion, but I was trying to focus on the basic economy of what was happening. But definitely, I agree.
I stopped on this, but there were 4 gentlemen indicated, so I'll take the gentleman in the front row. I see 1, 2, and another gentleman. Front row, yeah.
I suppose I have 2 things to say.
Identify yourself, sir, for me.
One is, in my own individual calculation, I live in America most of the year. America's heading for a 1929 depression. That's my own individual calculation. And I'm wondering, my question to you is that going to affect Europe in a big way? I presume it is, but I'm not an economist per se.
Well, to be honest with you, I'm not an economist per se either. I'm a plant and soil scientist whose father was an economist. But I don't see it's going to be like 1929. I don't think so. I mean, as I mentioned, there are people who are saying that we are in a depression. And in some respects, I think they're right. Paul Krugman, who is an economist, I think he's probably known here, but very well respected in liberal circles. Some radicals have some critiques, but he's coming around to some of our way of thinking, I would say. But he calls this the third Great Recession, the third depression of modern capitalism. That the first one was in the late 1800s, the second one was the 1930s, and this is the third. In the 1930s, we got out of by World War II, basically. In the United States, that's what ended the Depression. And massive government debt in order to provide for the 11 million, soldiers and the allies, etc., and all the material and everything that went into that. So, and then there were other things that happened afterwards, as I said. So I don't know. I think pretty soon, I mean, the question is what is a depression? A recession they have figured out. You have to have 2 quarters of below zero growth of the economy. Then that's a recession. If you only have 1 quarter, well, that's the question. So what's a depression? So even during the Depression, the Great Depression, as I mentioned, the average rate of growth of the 1930s, and this is before World War II started, at least in the United States part of it, the average rate of growth was 1.3%. Not all that different from the 1.6% the last 10 years. So there were years when the economy did grow and when it didn't. So now, is that going to happen in Europe? And a lot of it depends on what's happening, with Greece, what's going to happen with Spain, what's going to happen with Italy, Ireland. I know you guys don't like being referred to as the pigs, but I presume you know the terminology. Yeah.
We're the best students in Europe.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. By the way, Ireland is getting very good grades from the international banking community. I just want you to know that, and I hope it makes you feel better.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
That's a bad sign.
But I don't know. I think we're in for many years of great difficulty. I would guess Europe is going to be in the same category.
And the second thing on my mind, wasn't it a contention between the parties in the States to increase the faculty for borrowing more money and increasing the debt? Wasn't that one of their big issues?
It shows you I don't know how else to say it, and maybe this is too strong a word, maybe it's not, the insanity of the Republican Party in the United States. Not that all the Democrats are sane, and that doesn't apply to all Republicans, but they have a literally loony wing of the party, which has gained some dominance ideologically. And there is no problem with the United States having the debt that it has right now. It can borrow on the international markets at very low percent interest. As a matter of fact, if you want to buy a U.S. Treasury bond or note for just 2 months or 6 months, you're actually going to lose money. You're going to get less interest than the rate of inflation. if you're going to loan the money to the United States government for 10 years, you might get maybe 2.5%, which may be less than the rate of inflation. So there is no problem. They can borrow money very easily, mainly because the United States dollar is the major reserve currency of the world. And people, whenever there's a crisis, people are throwing money into US Treasury bonds. Even if they're getting very little or nothing out of it, they'd rather put their money there. It doesn't make a lot of sense in one way, but another way, they know the government's going to pay. So this was a relatively small group that has basically held the government hostage and said, we are not going to do this unless you agree to our demands. And Obama agreed, basically, I mean, as he has to other demands. And so there is no left. There's no, I mean, Obama is essentially a centrist Republican. What used to be called a centrist Republican.
Okay, I'm going to just the gentleman in the front and then yourself. And I'm going to go to the left and this gentleman and then the lady. Yeah, fine. Yeah. Just to know, I can see.
Desmond Fiddle. No. No, I wanted to ask, was there any decade, let us say, in the course of the 20th century in the United States, that you would consider things were pretty good and more or less the way people should live, and that you would like that to be the future? And any decade you would say, life was pretty good, that's the way things should be, and that you would like that to replace the present mess?
Just take one more question.
Yeah, sure.
You understand my question?
Yeah, I certainly do. I certainly do.
Very clear.
Hi, my name is Frank Fitzpatrick. I'm a trade unionist. I have there's one issue that I expected to hear mentioned and perhaps wasn't, and that's taxation. When we were encouraged to reiterate when I did a bad degree in economics many years ago, that taxation had a redistributive function. But I think that globalization and tax avoidance have simply destroyed that concept. And I think that one of the reasons, for example, the federal government has had to borrow to get itself out of the mess in the United States is because the tax base is shrinking all the time. I mean, the people on the medium income are probably paying most of the tax, certainly the vast proportion of the tax. I'd also like to ask about a Tobin tax. Is there any prospect of instating that, and would it help?
There's the tax on financial transactions. Yeah.
Foreign exchange.
Foreign exchange.
Okay, there are two questions. I'll take one more now because the gentleman who's been reading there, I did one, two.
Yeah, Brian O'Boyle is my name, member of the Socialist Workers' Party. Thanks very much, really enjoyed the talk. I just have two questions and one comment, basically.
You're writing this down.
Good. The first question really is about, it's a technical question about your analysis. You say that you start with this idea that you take it from Marx's volume 3, that basically the over-accumulation of capital is written large into the system itself, and that there's too much surplus value. But you didn't mention anything about the tendency for the profit rate to fall, and I wonder how you would actually incorporate that, because it seems to me that that's one of the key explanations of why en masse manufacturing capital made its way into the financial sector. In other words, that there's actually a causal link between the tendency for the rate of profit to fall and the actual increase in financialization. And the second thing, I think that then leads into a more orthodox Marxist analysis of the whole crisis and allows you to foreground things which you maybe didn't about the class nature of neoliberalism. Now, fair enough, I accept the fact that you spoke about class warfare, but I would have liked it a bit more teased out in terms of the overall analysis. So, for example, that the heightened exploitation was one aspect of, one way of heightened exploitation is to allow capital to become free. And when capital moves, then it becomes, this liberal capital can be captured by finance, because of course you've got to move capital through something, you move it through finance. So in a sense that allows you to, and what that does then is, it allows you to develop analysis which says, actually the real imbalance in the world is between capital and labour, and not so much, which I felt, this idea that some of it's about this fictitious capital which is in the system. It's also about the fact that actually in the world, capital as a class, its social power has increased massively over workers' social power, and eventually then my analysis would say, well, what do we have to do about that? Well, you've got to organise workers. I mean, the only way to organise against capitalism is actually to say, what are the agents which can actually mobilise against this social power? It's clearly the working class. And so I would end on a note which is a bit more optimistic, which would say, you know, if you look at Egypt and you look at Greece and you look at Spain, there are people reacting against this system, and there are people who are saying, actually, enough is enough, and we're not going to live under these kind of conditions. And okay, you know, the crisis is deep, but you know, there is a potential for a political response to this crisis. So it's not just an economic issue; it's political, and organising, you know, working people is what we should be trying to do. You know.
And what's the question?
There is a question.
The question I asked.
There is a question. We go back to the decade. What the decade?
Okay, let me try. I don't remember all the questions, but Catherine will help me. I know. You know, of course, you're talking about under capitalism.
Yeah, well, I mean,
yeah, okay.
That's what the system is.
Okay, absolutely. This is what the system is. I mean, partially it's my youth, okay, when I was a teenager and during the 1950s. In the United States, it was a good a decade. Not that there weren't problems. Not that there. I mean, not that there were certainly problems. You still had the blacks, you know, without rights to vote in the South. You had many issues in the country as a whole. So that's one of the problems of going back. But as far as
Excuse me, what decade are you referring to?
the 1950s,
1950.
it was a pretty good decade. I liked the music. It wasn't that Ireland, but in the United States, you know, the rate of growth was pretty high. You had the suburbs were developing. Workers were able to buy houses for the first time instead of renting us apartments, and so there were. I would say, you know, if I had to pick a decade, I don't know what happened.
You'd like to repeat it in the future.
I personally would rather not repeat it in the future. I'd rather have that than what we have now. Of course, just for the sake of humanness, I must say. But no, I don't. You know, there was a movie called Groundhog Day, where the person keeps repeating the same day for many times. I'd rather not repeat the 1950s personally, but I think that was an era where there was working class was doing well. In general, I think people were doing fairly well. Women were not as liberated in many ways as they are today. But and I mentioned, of course, that the issue of the African Americans also, of course, was terrible compared to today. It's still not great, but a lot better than it was then. But from sort of the general economic point of view, I would pick the 50s.
Okay, we move on to the taxation question. First part.
Well, the first part, yes. I mean, basically, you know, capital has used its strength. That is, the wealthy have used their strength to lower the rates of taxation on themselves, basically. And there's been a huge decrease in taxes, in the percent of taxes that a person pays. And when, you know, they talk right now, the highest bracket is 35%. Okay, but that's the highest bracket, and you're only paying that on the last bit that's above the last bracket, okay? So you're paying the same as a worker on your first, you know, whatever it is, 30,000, 40, 50,000, you know, once you get above a certain level. But there are so many ways around it. You know, one of the wealthiest persons in America is Warren Buffett. And he says you need to raise taxes on the rich. He says there's something wrong. His taxes last year, he paid a lower percent than his secretary. Percentage, okay? I've forgotten what she paid, like 15% or something like that. And even though you'd say, oh my God, the tax on the wealthy is 35%, there are so many ways around it. So you have, I've forgotten what he actually paid, but it was something like a 12 or 13%. But it was less than what his secretary and all of the other people who are on salary working for him were making. Well, this is unconscionable, you know. So now the wealthy still do pay a lot. When you add up the amount of taxes that they pay, it's still quite a bit in the United States. So they're still paying a very high amount of the taxes. But it's not as redistributive as it was in the past. And yes, I mean, if you have a progressive tax, it can be redistributive. If it's a regressive tax, it is not. You know, our sales tax certainly hits working people much more than it hits people who are wealthier. I'm sure the VAT does the same thing in Europe. So it depends on what the tax is, but a very strongly progressive income tax is one of the best ways to help redistribute monies. And the Tobin tax, a tax on any on any financial playing around is, I'd say, next to impossible. You know, you can't say anything's impossible, and I have no crystal ball, obviously, to predict the future. But these guys have so much power. I mean, just to give you an example, there are maybe 100, maybe 200 hedge fund managers in the United States. They have a special deal in the tax law. Their income isn't treated as income like my income or your income. Theirs is treated in a different way. And they're preferentially, and they're taxed at a fairly low rate, I think 15% or something like that. Even though they're making billions, okay? There have been a number of attempts in Congress to change the law. This affects, we're talking literally maybe 200 people. They can't get that changed. It's a very simple change in the tax law. There's nothing to it. And it doesn't even affect the other wealthy people. They can still, Warren Buffett can still do his shenanigans that he tells everybody about, and he says they're immoral. Okay, so that's how hard it is to get things passed. So to get anything passed on a financial transaction tax, whether it's on foreign currency, or whether it's just any type of financial transaction, it makes eminent sense because you could generate a lot of money very easily that way, at no cost to working people, essentially. But to actually get it done is, I just can't see how it can happen with considering the power of capital.
Okay, thank you.
Just, I see the hand sign. I'm going to just the last question, Brian. Brian's easy question.
Well, I don't want to get into the whole issue of the falling rate of profit, but I think that with the and I'll try to get on the other issue that you raised. Once you have monopoly capital, it's a whole different ball of wax, as they say, or a whole different ball game than when you had real competition, when you had many different companies competing with each other, and you could see that there was a falling rate of profit in that competition. But now these big corporations don't compete on price. They compete on advertising. They compete on, we talk about it in here. I'm not trying to sell a book, but I mean, I'm just saying that I don't get any royalties, by the way. The monthly review, you know, just to help keep the shop going. It's once you have monopoly capital, it's not clear to me that you actually do have a falling rate of profit. It's also very difficult to determine it because so much of what the company does has nothing to do with production. So much of what the company does has to do with the sales effort, with actually trying to get rid of the stuff, not produce it. And it's sometimes very hard to figure out within a company, is this person really connected with the production phase, or is this person connected with the sales phase? Because the sales phase takes many different forms. It's not a simple system. So I'm not sure that the falling rate of profit occurs or keeps occurring, certainly not in the way that Marx referred to it, once you switch from a really competitive system to a monopolized one. But still, I would make the case that companies were having trouble finding profitable investments. So in a way you'd say, well, isn't that something having to do with the falling rate of profit? And maybe it is, or maybe it just is overcapacity, which, you know, you've produced enough things, you don't need to produce anymore because everybody's got them. I mean, my father once talked in an interview about why there's a push to sell abroad, why to push to sell things abroad in the United States. And he said, listen, how many refrigerators does every family need? I think I talked to Eugene about this afternoon. So, okay, you have one in the kitchen, okay? And maybe if you have a basement, you have another one. Do you want one upstairs? Okay, you have 3 refrigerators. But how many do you need? Once you have all the refrigerators you need or want in your house, what are the refrigerator companies going to do? They have to find someplace else to sell them. And it's the same thing with other products too. You know, we have this tremendous, I mean, capitalism has tremendous capacity for production, for organizing production, of producing more and more, and has this problem of getting rid of what it produces. And so that is the push to go abroad. There was another part to the question where the issue about organizing, I guess, and you're right. I mean, I mean, absolutely. I think I made the point at the end that the way Europe got social democracy and the way the United States got the New Deal and the Great Society, shall we say, in the 1930s and in the 1960s, was by having a strongly organized left, a strong union movement, and having the Soviet Union as a place that made countries afraid. It made the United States afraid. It made, I think, the governments more willing to give in to workers than if they would be otherwise. Now we're at, I would say, in the modern times, a historic low with regard to the left in the United States. I can't speak for Europe, and certainly with regard to labor in the United States since the 1930s. This is a historic low. Number of organized workers, and also the respect that labor has among the general population is much lower than it was. And this, again, is all part of propaganda of the government. They've been very effective, and the newspapers have been part of it too, the media. And so, yes, I think there are bright spots. Certainly matters. The fight back in Wisconsin was a very bright spot. That the people who were that were occupying the Capitol building in Madison, Wisconsin, got notes and pizzas wired from Egypt. You know, to them, you know, was wonderful. You know, absolutely wonderful. You know, but there are not that many of those examples that we can point to in the United States. And there are marches, we have demonstrations, but at this point, it's no threat whatsoever to the system.
We'll take three questions. No, I do just, yes, that gentleman, and then yourself.
Hello, sir.
And then Karen.
I mean, you're really very welcome here to Ireland. And if you don't mind, I came down here tonight to ask you a specific question, sir. Because I appreciate, I've read the various journals and you have tremendous knowledge that I believe will be helpful to those of us who are fighting the austerity measures that's coming down the track. At 7 years old, I would love to have the time to study economics, etc., so I could make a really good argument myself. But I'm involved in an organisation called Repudiate the Debt. And I heard, well, I'm sorry, but I'm going to raise it. I know you mentioned earlier that's about the class war. And I read something recently, actually. It was one of the people who designed the neoliberalism agenda. And he said very clearly, yes, there is a class war, but we're winning it.
Absolutely. So,
in Repudiate the Debt, we believe that the debt that was imposed on the people in 2008, an enormous debt, is an odious debt. And it's something that, as I understand, is enshrined in international law. I say it's odious because, in the first place, the debt was taken on board and put on my shoulder and every other man, woman and child in this country without my permission, by way of an agenda of any sort of say, or as we normally have over here, a referendum. Secondly, the debt was not to benefit me or every other man, woman and child in this country. And thirdly, because I understand there are three sort of criteria for odious debt. Thirdly, those who gave us the debt did so in the knowledge that wasn't going to benefit us. So basically my question to you is, if you understand the situation we're in here at the moment, do you accept that the debt that was imposed on us is an odious debt? And is it possible to carry out an inquiry, so I think in Ecuador, in fact, correct me if I'm wrong now, I think it was President Carrera, they carried out an assessment of their debt and identified a section of it as odious debt, which promptly decided, no, so we're not paying it. So if you could, I'd appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
The lady, if you break for a minute, we'll just take a few minutes.
Carol Craig, and it may turn out that you've been answering this question all evening, and if so, I apologize. But for those of us who were also teenagers in the 1950s and who were on the American left, we were always very surprised at capitalism's ability to seem to recover itself from these crises and deliver yet again. It does seem, given your picture and other facts, that capitalism is not able to do so at this time. I believe that Paul Harvey has suggested that part of that problem is because it can no longer export the crisis. You have indicated that perhaps part of the problem is also that there's been no new flash technology around which society and the economy can organize. Do you believe that there is a root cause for capitalism's inability to deliver something out of this crisis that appears like normalcy and therefore stabilize the situation for itself, not necessarily for us, but for itself? And that's my question. Thank you.
This gentleman over here, he's waiting a while, just over there on the right. And then I'm going back to the gentleman here and the lady at the back after that. But we'll take the three first. After that, we'll be the third. No, sorry, now, there's two waiting there, then we'll be the third.
If we have a look at what happened this week in Talk and the obscenity of the capitalist markets, who are at this moment laughing and dining in actually England, while 575 people and their families have lost their employment. That is the evil of capitalism. I do not accept we are going through a recession. I accept it's class war. It's not a recession, it's economic, political class war. And it's Che Guevara's famous quote, if you oppose any type of injustice, then you're a comrade of mine. We have to raise our voices and stand with the trade union movement. And when Mary Harney tells us America or whatever her other favorite country, we have to say class unity under socialism. Let's not be afraid to use the word Marx. The neoliberal agenda has failed. The Kenny agenda has failed. The Tony O'Reilly agenda has failed. I wonder did Desmond, who gave financial support to the Irish financial gangsters, go to America and give the same support to the American financial gangsters? Class unity, solidarity, strength, no to exploitation, and stand it with the trade union movement is the way forward.
No, I'm going to I see the hands. I'm going to take two here in a minute. I'll let him answer those two questions. I'll come back to two, then this lady, and then I'll start again. It's now 9:30, so we were going to finish at 9:30, so I'm going to have to, I hate to do this to questioners after other questioners, and I've let them make statements, but if you could, for your own sake, make a specific question, because we're going to finish up. Will we say 9:45? Yes. 9:45, so that's 15 minutes to get through these questions and all the other people who've been waiting for ages. And my apologies. Okay, so we'll start with the easy one, and the gentleman in the blue shirt, but I won't call him a blue shirt. Given the depth of what he's saying, should we repudiate the debt, and if so, how? And
well, it makes sense to me. I don't. It was not something that had to be done. It was a choice. Now they will say, the government will say, as the government in the United States has said, with regard to what it did with its banks, we had to do this to save the financial system. And that is not true. Okay, the financial system, capitalism, could have been saved in another way. Some people would have lost a lot of money. It's true. Some wealthy people would have lost a lot of money. But there was, as I mentioned before, there was another way to essentially nationalize the banks and repudiate the debt because, hey, this was a private company. We're taking it over now just to resolve all the problems, but we're not paying these debts. We didn't take them on. So this could have been done in the United States. I think it could have been done in Ireland. I believe it could have been done legally. In the United States, it certainly could have been done legally. I don't know about the law here. But from any moral point of view, of course that's what should have been done.
nobody bothers with the law here, so.
Oh, nobody bothers with the law. Yeah, and we can change it. But it's a. So I would say definitely these are. Listen, we are either still paying, or as I mentioned, or maybe have just paid off the debts from the savings and loan crisis from the late 1980s, and you know it's. And by the way, just thinking about, I'm trying to keep my answer short, but one of the questions about the taxes, one of the things I just remembered, of course, they never increased the taxes when we went to war. So we have a war that's going to cost us, that is going to end up costing us, the estimates now are between $3 and $4 trillion. The first people to make estimates said 2 trillion. Everyone said they were crazy. They say now they made a mistake. They underestimated significantly the cost of these wars. And they didn't raise taxes. And so it's just more debt that occurs. Anyway.
It's yes to me, you did.
Absolutely.
And then Karen's question in relation
What,
to capitalism and its inability to deliver us out of this crisis.
I can't say that it can't deliver us out of this crisis. Capitalism is certainly resilient. There's no, I think we have seen that. It's been able to bounce back, as you've said, from many crises before. But I don't see how it gets out of this one. The logical way to get out of this, as I said, it was a joke, but it wasn't a joke. The logical way is to have the debt resolved.
The question was,
That would be debt repudiation for everybody.
the question is, why is it having trouble this time? Getting it, not whether it can or not, because I'm not asking you to be a futurologist, but
Well,
why
I think
is it having trouble?
what's happened this time is that it's sort of used up all its ammunition, shall we say. You have also, I mean, the Federal Reserve doesn't have much left in the United States, our national, central bank. Obama has just proposed, last night I guess it was it the night before, a new jobs creation supposedly proposal, some of which is nonsense and some of which might help. The chances of getting that through the Republican Congress, I would say, are very slim. But even if it did get through, it doesn't resolve the issues. It will give some work to some people, and that's good. But it doesn't really resolve the problem here. The problem is that there's nothing propelling the system forward. If you don't, or if you're not able to increase debt, okay, and I said this issue of the 1930s, when so many people and corporations and companies went bankrupt, that is a solution under capitalism. You have a severe depression, people go bankrupt, companies go bankrupt, you wipe out the debt. It's called deleveraging. It's wiping out debt, however it gets wiped out. And then you start the whole game again, because there isn't anything within the system that's propelling it forward. So it relies on the debt, and it relies on ever-increasing amounts of debt to stimulate the economy. And if it can't do that, it's not clear. The private sector, I don't see how they're going to do it. I mean, what do we need more of in the United States? We need more jobs. But when you think of things that people, cars or houses, we obviously have too many. We have, it's just refrigerators. We got too many of those. So what is going to be produced? Now, in a rational system, and capitalism is an irrational system. You can get out of this relatively easily. I'm not saying it wouldn't be hard, but compared to now, I just don't see a way out personally. So that's why I see for a while that it's going to continue at pretty much where we are now. May get a little better, may get a little worse, may get a lot worse, but I don't see anything that brings us back to a long period of high rates of growth so that we can absorb all of these unemployed people. I just don't see what the government can do to do that. And I don't see what the private sector can do to do that.
Just the gentleman over here, he didn't give a question, but you were going to make a comment, I think, in relation to his comments. There is no doubt in my mind. Bill Moyers, who is a very well-respected journalist, who is must be in his 80s now, and still active. He wrote an article maybe 20 years ago saying, and I think he quoted someone as saying, yes, there is class warfare, and we have won. It's the same thing that you said. And this was, and I've heard this from a number of people. If you say anything against rich people, the right wing is saying, oh my God, this is class warfare. You shouldn't be talking like that, okay? But what this is, I mean, the neoliberal agenda, getting back to your comments, is part of the neoliberal agenda, is implicit class warfare.
that is doing what capital can to get more of what there is in society, to get more capital at the expense of labor. And this has been a concerted effort. It hasn't been very well hidden, but it hasn't been talked about openly except very unusual times. And I think this is definitely what's been going on. And in the United States, I would date it to the 1980s and to the Reagan era of real class war.
Now there's a gentleman and then the lady at the back. I'll take you a second. This gentleman has been waiting with the glasses, and then there's a lady and a gentleman there. That's 4. I'm going to sort of draw to a close if you don't mind. That's 4. That's okay. If somebody wants the gentleman here with the glasses, yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm Donald McGarry. I'm with the Socialist Workers' Party as well and the United Left Alliance. Just want to thank you as well in terms of the analysis, in terms of, like, there's a lot of commentary in this country about the banking crisis, but particularly in terms of the deeper crisis of capitalism and how, what the woman in front of me talked about, how as the system gets older, the units of capital get bigger, they're not able to let them go to the wall, and therefore, rather than being able to escape its own crisis, the system clogs up and generalizes the crisis. And I think in terms of to move, just what can we do about this? I think this is, because I think the last 2 years, the government here and across Europe, because I think one of the things in Europe is that we are in the center of a zone of crisis, unlike maybe in America where the crisis here is the sovereign debt crisis anyway. At least America has the dollar, the European countries don't. But they've told the population, accept this austerity and it will get back on track, and it hasn't worked. And now increasingly they're even saying it themselves, saying someone will have to pick up, we're paying again past the parcel, and someone...
I don't let everybody else go, but just a question, sorry. So what can we do about it?
As part of the ULA, I think it does come down to politics and people power. So this weekend, there's a meeting on Saturday in Wynn's Hotel at 10 o'clock to pull together a coalition to organise protests against the coming budget, which is going to be led by the Labour Party. Yeah? So that's so we want to try and get as many people to do it, because I think that's the solution. It's not their crisis can be resolved.
You're asking people to turn up for the protest.
Yeah, and I think the need for a left alternative is what's posed in this crisis. It's not just an economic question.
Thank you.
The lady at the back, the lady has been waiting. Yeah. I'm going to come to you, and I'm going to come to that lady. I'll come to
I just wanted to say that I am in the last chapter of The Gods of Money by William Engdahl, and he describes there the money trust, who have all this power, who create the booms and the bust, and they are definitely socialising the debt onto the taxpayers and privatising all their gains. Just, if anybody wanted to read it, it's an eye-opener. Thank you.
Now, there's a lady here and a gentleman in front of her.
Anna Byrne, the 1916-1921 club. Professor, I'd like your view on the following question, which is the question. Now, you spoke about the hedge funders and that there were 200 approximately, and that they only paid 15%, you said.
I think so.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, how come that they were able to get Magdoff, and he's in prison for life, never getting out? Now here we have, in a much, much smaller way, people who did exactly the same thing, and we have the bankers. Fraud, fraud, fraud. Now, I mean, what's the difference? Have you laws there that got him into prison for life? And what about us? What do we need here? Thank you.
Gentleman in front.
You'll be very pleased to know I'll be very brief. Bernard Morgan, Connolly Association, County Liverpool. First thing is, I'd like to apologise for not having any debt, because I now know that I should have had debt, and I'll try and do better next week, to help you out. The other thing is, a question. Do you think I should learn Chinese?
You should definitely learn Chinese, no matter what. I have Stone, who was a reporter in the United States. After he retired, he learned Greek.
Oh yeah.
I mean, he was well into his 80s when he learned Greek in order to be able to read the original manuscripts of some of the ancient Greek works. And,
That's all right, I speak Greek.
oh, okay.
I said no to somebody there. Somebody was putting up the, yeah, yourself, was it? No? Yeah, just the...
I'll be very short. Carl Martin. And since we have to push in the formal question, I'd say, can you tell me?
If you're right.
What effect the printing of money in the United States is going to have, both short-term and long-term?
All right. Anyone else burst into have a question? The last one, okay. We're finishing. That's last one.
Hi, Rachel Sanandon. Thanks very much for giving me Magdoff Chocolate Hair. I think this is fascinating. What I think is absolutely fascinating is when you said there's actually these people, millionaires, who are saying we want to pay more tax. And the first question I have is, why in God's name are they being stopped? I mean, what is wrong? No, it might be a naive question, but what is wrong with the political parties who realise, I mean, I actually have another question, and this is it. It would seem to me that the whole it would seem to me that it's an entire phony. It's an entire phonyism that's going on. I mean, it seems to me that the more debt you have, the more money you can make. So it would seem to me that the whole money system is a nonsense. The whole thing is just a nonsense, a sort of Truman show, if you like. It's all a virtual reality. And what would seem to me of interest is looking at the other types of capital, which I think are much, much more important to preserve. The ability to be educated, the ability to learn Greek, to learn Latin, to have all of these cultural things. It seems to me that technology, I think the big battle in the future will be with technology, will be with the internet, will be with social media. That's where the hearts and minds issues. It seems to me there's something wrong with the people who don't seem to realise they're in an enormous crisis and they could resolve it. That seems to me, it seems to me they're on the way to
We'll have to
enormous.
pursue that one later, I think, in the book.
That's what seems to me.
Okay, we're going to finish on, thank you very much. This one gentleman, is it one question or because I'm getting all sorts of bad looks up here in the front?
No, one question.
Okay, one quick question.
Paul Dorn from Salmondon. Thank you very much. It was great listening to you tonight. The question is, our friend, the American Warren Buffett, is complaining that he's not able to pay enough tax. The same gentleman employs hundreds of thousands of people in birth, you know the company, I can't remember it now. He could very easily, very simply, or why doesn't he? The question is, why doesn't he pay his employees a lot more in terms of wages?
Can I start with that one? Let me just start with that one, and if it also relates to a question that someone else asked, you know, why can't they just pay it? I mean, first off, there are very few.
No, why can't he pay his employees?
No, I know. I'm going to get to that. There are very few people like Warren Buffett. He's an unusual wealthy person in the United States who has somewhat of a conscience. You know, I wouldn't go too far, but he has somewhat of a conscience, and he understands a contradiction like this when he sees it. But there are not many of his class, which is really the upper class in the United States. You know, the upper 1% I'm talking about. So he certainly is willing to pay more, but these other folks don't want to pay anymore. And there's nothing stopping him from writing a check to the United States government, but my guess is he's not going to do it. That's just my guess. Now, getting back to the issue of paying higher wages, I mean, in general, part of the contradiction of capital could be solved. Not all of it, but part of it could be solved by paying workers more. I mean, one of the problems with this class warfare that's gone on is that less and less is going to labor and more is going to capital. Okay, so that means that labor can't really buy more stuff, good or bad stuff, unless they go into debt or unless they have two-earner households or they work longer hours. There are ways to do it, but basically they're finding it harder and harder to do that. So what's good for the individual capitalist, which is make as much money as you can, pay as little as you can in wages, actually is a problem for the entire system. But there's no way to get the capitalist, I don't think, to go against his own interests. And their interest is growth of capital, to have more capital tomorrow than I have today. That is in the very DNA of the capitalist. It is part and parcel of they can't think of anything else. This is the way they are. They have to work, and they do work, and it's all internalized in them. So I just, obviously there are individual employers that are nicer than other individual employers and that pay more, but in general, that a capitalist will not respond to that type of a question. They just won't do it.
Printing more money.
Oh, they're printing more money. Well, first off, a lot of that money hasn't been printed actually. What has happened is that they have bought treasury bonds on the open market from willing sellers of the bonds. But the purpose, I'm talking about what's called quantitative easing. So you have QE1, we've had QE2, and now they're talking about a possible QE3. So I don't think, some of that money may have been printed, but I think the majority of that money actually